Okay, it's 10:31, so we'll get going. Thank you for joining everyone this morning. My name is Jody Dong. I'm the Executive Director for Partnerships and Legislation at the Ministry of Infrastructure. I have joining me today several members of my team, as well as colleagues from Ministry of Housing and Municipal Affairs, and also the Intergovernmental Relations Secretariat. And what we're going to do today is I'll run through the slides that we have. I think I have about 20 slides to go through, and then we'll have a Q&A section at the end. Happy to talk with you today. Look forward to your feedback and comments. We've been working with UBCM, Glenn Brown and Brant closely to provide this opportunity. So let's get going. Next slide, please, Brittany. I'll just pass this over to Claudia. Thank you for all your support, Claudia. She's just going to run through some housekeeping items.
Thank you so much, Jody. Before we get started, everyone, I want to go over some housekeeping items to ensure we're all set up for this session. So note that this webinar will be recorded, and we will make a link to the recording and the slides available after this session so that you can go over the session one more time. We'll send out an email to all the people that registered for the event. You might have noticed that we have disabled the chat function for this session. That's because we encourage everyone to use the Q&A function to ask their question at the end of the session. So you're welcome to use the Q&A function, which is located in the top menu, to post your questions throughout the session, but just note that we won't get to them until later after we're done with the presentation. If you wish to ask any questions live, you're more than welcome to. Please note in the Q&A that you wish to ask your question live, or you can also use the raise your hand function, which is located in the top menu as well. Once you've raised your hand or asked that you want to ask your question live, then I will enable your mic and your camera at the time of the question. Questions should be clear and concise and respectful, of course. And again, as mentioned before, we will be addressing as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion at the end of this session. That's it for housekeeping. Back to you, Jody.
Thanks, Claudia. Next slide, please. So today we have a specific purpose for this webinar. So this is a consultation session with local government staff on the Provincially Significant Criteria regulation, which is under the Infrastructure Projects Act, which was passed on May 29th earlier this year. And so that's what we'd love to hear from you today specifically about. I'll go over our timeline in a couple slides of the broader consultation that we'll be doing with local governments. We also have the elected officials session set up for October 22nd. So I'll provide some context of the Act and the reasons for the Act, the sort of what and the why. And then we'll talk about getting into the actual structure of the legislation. So we have project categories and the two types that we have, which is how the Act is structured. And then we'll get into the actual proposed criteria for designation of provincially significant projects and talk about next steps and further consultation. Next slide, please. So the why and the what. Yes, thank you, Claudia. We do have 90 minutes allocated for the webinar. We may not need that much, but happy to stay on with you for that amount of time. So the why and the what of the Infrastructure Projects Act. This is really about getting kind of from the provincial point of view. A lot of this is about provincial decision making and the delays that can occur. So it's really about providing some mechanisms for the province to be able to kind of get out of our own way and reduce duplication, and then also be able to work with local governments and First Nations and other partners to get to those decisions faster as well. And it's really it is mainly focused on the ministry's core infrastructure, which is schools, universities, colleges, and healthcare. That's what Ministry of Infrastructure is responsible for. It's a new ministry that was created at the end of 2024. So it's not about all the other types of infrastructure that we might think of in that broader meaning of infrastructure, except for maybe provincially significant projects if they're very, very large. Next slide, please. So the reason that the Act was created was really to find opportunities to support community and provincial growth faster. And it's not about funding projects and being able to designate a project as provincially significant and then like early on in the conceptual stage and then be able to access funding. It's really specifically focused on getting to the reviews of required provincial and local and other requirements and being able to expedite provincially significant and critical infrastructure through that process and getting to that process faster. So the why is really, we know that projects can face delays caused by layered approval processes, and that's, local, provincial, and federal and permitting requirements. Delays then can mean missed opportunities, and we've all dealt with the escalating cost through inflation of building anything anywhere these days and how rapid that's happening. So resulting in really higher costs for projects. So this is really about trying to get through those processes faster once the project is kind of underway or it's approved. How can we expedite and address the delays that we've caused, a lot of it being the province, by kind of overlapping and having unnecessary requirements. So that's really been driving the why. And I did want to emphasize that this act is part of a much broader provincial initiative. You might have seen the statutory permitting initiative that was launched last week for the natural resource sector. So we're very closely working with them on how to address infrastructure for the natural resource sector as well, and get to be able to rebuild communities after disasters more quickly and navigate through that maze of permitting that's required. So it's part of that broader initiative. This is meant to deal with specific instances of permitting that happens and do it through the designation of those projects. And then so it's within our sector, our kind of community infrastructure sector, but also the natural resource sector where this work is going on. And particularly with our sector, student housing, you might have seen there's been quite a few announcements recently about student housing and long-term care, those kinds of facilities. So we're starting to see how we can get those built faster. Yes, sorry, next slide. So what we're doing, we've passed the act, and so we've been out engaging a lot with First Nations and our industry partners and delivery agencies, and we've been talking with UBCM over the summer about how to engage local governments specifically. So that was all was passed in the spring, and then over the summer, we did have a regulation for engagement for the public that was open online over the summer. And we got really good feedback and quite a lot of submissions. We had a survey and a primer, and then now we're doing the consultation webinars for local governments. We're continuing to work with First Nations as well and other partners throughout the fall. And we anticipate that the regulation for provincially significant criteria will be proposed to government by the end of the year. And then we also, once that in sort of parallel with that, and today later we have a meeting with UBCM staff about how to engage local governments on the local government policies that we have under this regulation as well. So we'll focus on provincially significant criteria today, and then we'll be providing another opportunity to talk about specifically the local government policy pieces, which I'll talk about, which don't require a regulation to move forward with. And then that last little donut there, the other IPA regulations, we are working with the Environmental Assessment Office. They're creating an expedited environmental assessment process for projects designated under this act. And so you'll see that being launched later this fall. Next slide, please. So I'll start to get into the categories of projects now. So we have two categories. The first one is category 1 that we're calling, and it's infrastructure, Ministry of Infrastructure projects. So that sector, the schools, universities, and colleges, childcare, long-term care facilities, or it can be other provincial capital projects. And then category 2 are the provincially significant projects, which are much broader. And I'll go into that in the next couple slides. So the Act provides for projects to be designated under one of these categories. So as I mentioned, the first one is category 1, provincially funded and delivered projects. So those can be major projects that are from the ground, like greenfield or brownfield, or they can be upgraded with existing ones, like schools or hospitals. And they can be delivered by school districts or universities, colleges, health authorities. They can also be delivered by other ministries. So for example, Ministry of Transportation and Transit. So it could be a bridge or a road that's delivered by them. Those would all be considered category 1. Those do not need to have a set of criteria through a regulation. So we're not talking about the criteria for these projects today because they're under the purview of the province. The next ones, the category 2 ones, do need to have that set of criteria approved, and that's what we'd like to hear from you about. Next slide, please. So the category 2 ones are provincially significant projects, and they are delivered by Crown corporations. For example, BC Hydro could be developed or delivered by local governments, First Nations, or private entities. And part of that is the funding as well. So they would not be completely provincially funded, and they would be delivered by one of these entities. Next slide. So the tools that we're calling that are available under the Act, and these are available to category 1 or category 2 projects, are kind of in 3 buckets. So the first bucket is provincial permits. So if a project is designated, it can be eligible for prioritized provincial permit reviews. So if there's a project and it needs a provincial permit, say for example a water license, then rather than going to the end of the line, it would be prioritized, and so would be able to get to that review faster. And then we're also building a qualified professional reliance model. So rather than have a in-house government statutory decision maker reviewing a permit approval or part of a permit approval, a qualified professional that could be sourced externally would be available to do that if that's one of the tools that's chosen. And there, just incidentally, we do have on our Engage website, there's a survey and a primer open for qualified professional model. If you're interested in that, we'd love to hear from you on that one as well. And then environmental assessments, as I mentioned, the expedited environmental assessment review. The Environmental Assessment Office is doing that as part of their 5-year review of their legislation that they're doing right now, among other things. And so we'll be working and partnering with them, but that will be their initiative. And the connection to us is that it is only available for projects designated under this legislation. And then they have another mechanism, actually, which was already available to them under their own legislation, that if an environmental assessment certificate is issued, then they could have there could be automatic issuance of some provincial permits because there's a lot of duplication when they have to then go back and apply for that permit. They've already provided a lot of that information ahead of time as part of the environmental assessment process. So they can issue those if it's designated. And then the local government reviews, and these are the policies, so these don't require regulations, but we do want to come back and work with you and have you provide input into these two pieces. So one is that local governments can request through resolution to the province to temporarily postpone provincial land use planning requirements. So for example, it could be zoning. If there's a school that is coming to they want to build a school in the community and the area is not zoned for that, rather than going through that rezoning at that time, that they could request, local governments, you could request to have that process delayed and come back at a regularly scheduled time when you're updating for example, your official community plan. And then so if local government requests that, then we can take that forward and as part of a designation potentially for Category 1 or Category 2 projects. And then the second one is an agreement seeking process between either a project proponent or the province and a local government to break through a decision-making delay or barrier. If there's something that's happening in a local government approval process, it provides the ability to have agreements or have the province appoint a facilitator if there's a particularly challenging approval or review. Then it's an opportunity to be able to work together to try to come up with a solution to get a project going. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's an overview. That's kind of the first section of the presentation. That's an overview of the 6 mechanisms that we have to be able to try to get these projects through reviews faster, and an overview of the Act and what's coming in terms of the consultations. And so now I'll kind of switch gears a bit into what we're seeking input today, and that's on the criteria for provincially significant projects. Next slide, please. So we have more information on our Engage website about this as well. We have a primer up, and it's really essentially the same information that I'll present today. So we have, in order for a project to be eligible for this designation, and this is for Category 2 projects, it needs to be able to go through these, meet the requirements under project type, First Nations decision makers support, core requirements, and additional benefits. And do want to say that these are all proposed right now. We would appreciate your thoughts and feedback on this. Are we missing anything? Are there any kind of clangers in there that don't make sense? And I'll go through each of these circles in the next few slides. And I did want to add that even if it does meet all of these criteria, it will only means that it's eligible for designation, doesn't give it an automatic designation. That is decided ultimately by government. Next slide, please. And just while I think of it, because I don't think we have a slide on it, but the way that that process works is if it is approved by government, then it would be published in a regulation online on BC laws, and there will be specifics about the project and what designation tools were assigned to it and the timeline and specific information. So it will be very transparent that way. You'll be aware of each project that's designated. So the first criteria is project type. And so in order for project to be provincially significant, it must address one or more of the high priority categories on the perspective of government's high priorities listed below. Food or water supply, providing supply chain capacity, critical minerals and mining, post-disaster recovery, human health and safety, environmental restoration, energy security, meeting BC's climate goals, public infrastructure, and affordable housing. This is obviously very broad, and many different types of projects could be meeting this criteria, and that is intentionally so. So the first kind of goalpost is quite broad, but all of these are identified through strategies or government's priorities as really important to move forward. And we can, if you have questions about what each of those mean, we can certainly happy to address those in the Q&A. And then the second criteria, First Nations decision maker support. So the project must have support for the designation from First Nations decision makers. So this doesn't replace the Crown's duty to consult on with First Nations on a given project, but there will be another consultation with First Nations that are most significantly and directly impacted on the designation of the project and which of the tools are assigned to it. And if we do not receive that First Nations support, then the designation will not go ahead. As you can imagine, this is very complicated process, and so we are working with First Nations Leadership Council and Modern Treaty Nations Association and many First Nations on what this looks like and how it would work and the timing of it in terms of the consultations on the project more broadly. So we'll continue to work with them to develop that process. But it is a key support mechanism that must happen. And then criteria 3, so these are core requirements. Each of these must be met. And so project readiness, the project must have financing in place, must have what we're calling a path to success. So those elements such as a feasibility study, a business case, partners in place must all be there. So what we're trying to get at here is that we won't be designating projects that are not firmly going to happen or are quite sure going to happen. As we know, projects get canceled, but we want to be able to have some confidence if we go through all this work to try to expedite the reviews that the project's actually feasible enough to happen. In most of the cases and in most of the tools, the designation would happen after the project is likely approved and at least started or underway, except for the expedited environmental assessment process, which would have to happen earlier for the bigger projects. So that's what we mean by project readiness. A project, the issue or the problem must also need to be able to be addressed by the tools provided in the Infrastructure Projects Act. So if someone's asking for a project to be designated in order to get funding, that can't be addressed by this legislation. So the concern or problem must be able to match the tools and the solutions that we have. We must state why. When it's designated in the regulation, we need to be transparent about that and state what the issues are or might be and how the tool will address it. And then the third one is that the project is material and significant. And there are two ways it can be, and it's an either or. The first one is that it must exceed a capital cost threshold of $100 million. We've had quite a bit of feedback that that's too much, too high for communities, particularly some nations, and so they won't be able to be eligible for this. And so we are looking at revising particularly this criteria. Or the project provides significant public benefits. So for example, community amenities, boosting the local economy, and we're still working out what that means exactly and would love to hear from you about that. Next slide, please. Criteria 4, a project must achieve one or more of these additional benefits. And we realize some of these are repetitive from the core requirements, but it's really meant to be another layer to pass through. So a trade diversification, access to new markets or access to new markets, supply chain security, replacing US imports, improving community livability. So there's some pieces in there about housing and housing types, transportation options, efficient use of infrastructure within a community, and achieving labor goals. So providing employment. And that's the end of the slides. So that's our website there. So you can go there to find any more information. We would be happy to hear from you. We do have a project email inbox at engage.inf@gov.bc as well. If you want to submit anything that you might not get to today, or you think about something after, we'd be happy to follow up with you. We do monitor that very closely and get a lot of great submissions through there. So happy to hear from you there, and now happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have. Should we take the deck down, Brittany? Thanks. So Team BC, the provincial reps, if you could put your cameras back on.
Yep, so it looks like we don't have any Q&As yet, but we have one person with their hand up. Looks like Axel. So Claudia, if you don't mind taking Axel off of mute and allowing them to put their camera on, that'd be great.
Hi, good morning, Axel from City of Kelowna here. My question is with regards to the very broad kind of public infrastructure for project types in terms of addressing that. So within the realm of local governments, of course, delivering public infrastructure is what we do. And so is there a more specific definition around that, and how can we distinguish whether a municipal project for public infrastructure would fit within these categories versus not?
I think that's something that we're building now. We've had quite a lot of submissions through the engagement that we had on this earlier, and so I don't know, Brittany or Jeff, if you want to, if there's any further thoughts on that. For example, like examples that we have from that handy, but it's something that we're still working on. And if you have thoughts on what that should be, we'd be happy to hear from you on that.
I think we were thinking, yeah, like local government or regional government led projects. So like wastewater treatment, community centers, recreation, things of that nature in terms of public infrastructure that's delivered by parties other than the province and with other funding sources.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
I think maybe the only other thing that we would add is that we do see local government infrastructure fitting into that category. It's just, making it significant enough to be something that would require a designation. Also has to be able to, it has to have some, the tools in our act have to be able to support the project moving faster. So those have to be like the issues around the project, but certainly open to, as Jeff said, thoughts on what type of infrastructure would be significant enough to need some of these tools or pathways, or what your thoughts are from a community perspective, because the vision is that we would like local government to see themselves as, having opportunities through this as well. And there is a question in the Q&A, Jody. So maybe I'll just pause and see, Axel, was there anything else you wanted to add to that? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
No, that's great. And I think it's nice to hear that there's opportunity for us to provide some input, certainly, especially with large projects within both local and regional governments, and that include provincial partnership requirements, right? Whether it's transit, for example, would be one. So certainly we'll advance some feedback for that. Is there a deadline for when the feedback can be provided?
Yes, so we have closed public facing feedback, but we're still interested in hearing from local governments and First Nations. So we have another webinar, which you probably know about, with local elected officials from local government in, I think, 2 weeks. So we've identified a week after that webinar for written feedback to our email inbox. So that's October 29th. We can follow up with registrants with a reminder on that too.
Thank you. Yes, the next question, great question. I'm going to ask our Director of Legislation, Lynn Tang, to speak to that.
Sure, thanks, Jody. So with respect to that question, Jeff, under the Act, the agreement seeking process, which is found in Division 3 of the Act, requires the Lieutenant Governor and Council to authorize the use of that particular tool. And in the regulation that designates that particular project, the regulation would also have to identify that particular tool being activated. So to speak for that project, the regulation would need to identify who the project proponent is, whether it is a Crown agency or a private sector proponent, or possibly even in a case where it's a Category 1 project, maybe a ministry proponent. And then there's a series of steps that are activated, which starts with the project proponent and the local government having discussions to come to a implementation agreement, an agreed upon implementation agreement. If that doesn't happen, there are powers that either the Lieutenant Governor has with respect to a situation where it might be a government proponent, or if it's another proponent that's not government, then the minister has the ability to appoint a facilitator to help the parties come to an implementation agreement. So it's basically a series of assistance that can be provided towards getting to an implementation agreement. And then if there's other further steps that are found in Division 3 that enable either Lieutenant Governor or the minister to appoint, to establish a replacement measure to address the constraint that is identified as being the source of the delay behind the permitting.
Thanks, Lynn.
Okay, we have another question in the chat, Jody. Would the public infrastructure also include the drinking water supply, storage reservoir, and distribution systems?
Yes, I think they could. This is open to local government-led projects. The key is that they would need to meet, I mean, I think they would meet most of the criteria, but they would need to be of provincial significance in terms of size and cost. And so they couldn't be used for a sort of smallish system. We were thinking, in terms of water, I guess it's more wastewater, but Iona wastewater treatment plant is a very large project. So it would need, I mean, much larger than $100 million, but something on that scale of, we could put $100 million in there to kind of denote the significance of it. But I think in terms of the type of project that they would be able to be considered, it would just need to be more the size, I think. Does anyone else have any from the province, have any other comments on that? Did I get that?
Maybe I'll just add, sorry, sounding like I'm talking at the same time, so on. Maybe I'll just add, Jody, that as we're going down this route of consultation and starting to hear from folks and starting to think about like what ways what we're proposing may or may not work. One thing we've heard as a potential like alternative to the $100 million threshold is perhaps like partnership or multi-jurisdictional collaboration could be an alternative for that requirement. So there may be projects that are not at that $100 million threshold, but they're significant enough because they're something that several local governments are interested in, or a local government and a First Nation, maybe a regional district and a couple of municipalities. So there's like regional level of significance. So it's not an official, proposal yet, but it's just something that's been bubbling to the top. And I'm just interested to hear from folks if that's something that would resonate with your communities or with anyone's interest. Just put that out there as a suggestion, because we do need to have that level of significance there. And we've got a couple more questions. So I think Ron has his hand up here, and I think he was before some of the questions that popped up in the Q&A. So maybe Claudia, if you don't mind unmuting Ron and putting his camera on, and he can jump in and ask his question.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. Just a quick question, or a couple of quick questions. Ron Gill from City of Surrey here. So under the affordable housing category, so how is affordable housing being defined? That's my first question. And what are the parameters around it? So are these provincially owned, operated, funded units? Are they not-for-profits, operated? Like, what are the parameters around the affordable housing category? Thanks.
Great question. I don't know how affordable is being defined these days. I know that's a challenging one to define. I don't want to put HMA colleagues on the spot, but are there any? We would defer to another definition if that's what was accepted provincially. I don't know what that is at the moment. Does anyone else want to speak to that?
I'm not sure that I can provide any specific insights, but, appreciate it's a very complicated topic that tends to, have a lot of different implications depending on where you're situated within a community. And so I think it's just generally something that if it's being considered, we would want to be really thoughtful about. And so certainly input and feedback from local governments in this space is, of course, very welcomed.
Thank you, Jessica. And I guess my comment would be that, it is something that probably needs some thought around, because there's a whole affordable housing can accommodate a whole wide range of different types of projects. So just some clarity on how that's being defined and what the parameters around it would be something to think about. Thank you.
Yeah, and the reason we have it as affordable is that it's we did actually previously have housing as a category on its own, but it's not meant to be high-end luxury condos, that kind of thing. So that's kind of as far as we've gotten in terms of defining that, but lots more work to do on that. And sorry, Ron, what was your second? You had another question.
That was it. So one was,
okay.
One was, they're kind of the same question. So one is how's it being defined? And the second is what the parameters around it are in terms of who operates the units and things like that. But it sounds like it's just for further discussion.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay, we've got quite a few questions in the Q&A now, Jody. So I think the first one here is from Alice, and it's, if we want to apply our project to be provincially significantly designated, when can we start applying?
So we are not having a application process for this. So the way that a project goes through these that sort of flow chart and meeting the criteria is that depending on what type of project it is, we are having a particular ministry who would be working with the proponent or the local government on that project. That would be, they would assess whether that is meeting the criteria initially to have a kind of look at it and accept it as something that we would look at further. And then then that ministry would bring it to the Ministry of Infrastructure, and we would work on them to put the project through all of those criteria that we just talked about. Lynn, did you want to add anything to that? I know you're better at speaking about this part than me.
Yeah, I think I would also add that it might be that it's the permitting ministry that is involved with looking at the approvals for that particular project that might want to raise that particular project that local government may be working on that might benefit from the use of one of the tools. So it could be, as Jody says, a ministry that's involved in the delivery of the project, but with the local government, or it could also be a permitting ministry.
Right. So it's, I know we've had, there's concern about proponents being able to kind of come in and apply, and that's not the way it's working. The way it will work is that, there's typically for a provincially significant size project, there will be a ministry that will be working with that proponent or local government if they're the proponent, and will be aware of delays or issues, bottlenecks that are happening in the permitting process. And so they would evaluate that and see if it's worthy of bringing to the Ministry of Infrastructure. That's how that's how the process is getting started.
And the next question is, I'm curious in what the bill and related policies could mean for an applicant's ability to lobby the provincial government to expedite their given project as a means to sidestep local government processes and requirements. Would projects still need to comply with the local government's regulations like OCP designations, ALR regulations, zoning, business bylaw requirements, etc.?
Yeah, I think for that first part, the first question, part of the question, the proponent, so there needs to be a clear problem that the tools in the Act can address. And so it's sort of, I guess the word lobby, it's, because there's no funding attached to this designation, it's really about getting through some bottlenecks and being able to come to agreements about particular permitting processes that are going slowly. And so I think there's already a connection as it works now with ministries around this permitting, the permitting processes. And so the ministries, as I said, they would be aware of issues and they would use their expertise and their kind of analysis to bring it forward to the Ministry of Infrastructure. And then we would need to put it through all of those criteria. It's not meant to sidestep local governments. The one tool where local governments can request, that's to delay those provincial planning requirements. That's completely on the part of the local government. And then the other, or sort of on the, I guess, initiative of the local government, it's very optional. And then the other one is really about, it really is meant to be an agreement seeking process. So if there's a delay and there's an issue, then there's tools provided for the proponent and the local government, or the province and the local government, to be able to have a facilitated agreement on how to address this delay, and hopefully be able to deal with it that way to move forward. So it's definitely not meant to sidestep those, and it would need to be still comply with the local government's processes. Lynn, did you want to add anything, or anyone from HMA?
Yeah,
to that?
Yeah, I think I would just add that the tools are really targeted towards addressing a specific issue. It's not meant to be a general tool that can be used if a proponent finds that there are delays that they don't want to have to deal with, or permitting rules or other local government rules that they don't want to follow. So as part of the assessment, there needs to be a look at what the problem is and whether the tools could be of benefit to address that particular issue. But it's not a general override tool, if that helps.
Yeah, and it's definitely not applicable to all cases. So, for example, the business licensing, no, or anything regarding, health and safety, building standards, that kind of thing. That that wouldn't be part of this.
And the next question says, with full respect to Indigenous cultural values, noting that the province is looking to expedite environmental permitting, is there consideration to expediting the Archaeological and Heritage Conservation Act permitting process for these provincially significant projects?
I know that and I think you're aware of the current review of the Heritage Conservation Act, and I know they're out for engagement, and that process has just been extended. don't know very much about that, but anything that is subject to the Heritage Conservation Act would not be part of this process. That would be dealt with under their process. I think unless, and I'm actually not sure about this, but the only one that I could think might be applicable is the prioritized provincial permitting. If there's a permit required under that legislation, I think it could apply to be prioritized.
Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
Lynn, yes, please.
Yeah, I think of all the tools, that's probably the one best candidate for that use.
What I'll say is that I know that there's a lot of consideration for expediting the archaeological permits in the province. That it's a wide understanding, and one of the main reasons why the review of the act is happening is around the archaeological backlogs and recognition that there has to do something different. So you may rest assured that even if it's not addressed through our act, that there's a lot of considerations there. I do believe they have a site on the Engage BC website as well, so it might be a good place if you're wanting to learn more, is to go on that site and to check it out.
The next question is about the $100 million threshold. So I've answered it in the comment there. It's either $100 million capital cost or the project provides significant public benefits. Hopefully that's clear.
Yes, it would be 100 million is the minimum. Yeah.
The next question is, what is the strategy for funding spread? Are local or regional governments expected to contribute a specific percentage towards projects? Is there more strength for projects that are in partnership with First Nations?
That's a good question. No, in terms of your first question, are local or regional governments expected to contribute a specific percentage? So for category 2 projects, any project that is not completely provincially funded would be eligible. I think at this time, that's what we're thinking. I don't want to, because it is still proposed, so we need to confirm that, but that's what we're thinking right now. That's a good question. The second one, we don't have weighted ratios right now in the formula. But we have actually had quite a bit of feedback that we need to have some weighting in there, but we haven't really thought about that yet, what that would look like. I don't know if there would be more strength for First Nations projects at the moment, currently, no.
Maybe I'll just reiterate too, Jody, that every project that is proposed for a provincially significant designation does require the support of the First Nations that are most impacted. So that's a requirement that's already in there. That's not, that doesn't mean that if First Nations were like a partner in a project versus just supporting, that it would be weighted more heavily. But if First Nations are a partner, then they're probably more likely to support the project. And that is one of the core requirements that we're proposing at this time.
Yeah, thanks. And just to kind of thinking about the last couple of questions, I think if there was a project that was brought forward, say by First Nation and a local government as a joint project, and it didn't meet the 100 million threshold, that could be considered a significant public benefit. So if you have thoughts about that and you think that you might have a project that would kind of look like that, then please let us know. You can through the email or the comments here. If that's something that you feel is necessary or needed and in this scheme, because we're just not aware of what you're kind of thinking about for projects, then that there's potential for us to consider that for sure. Hopefully that answers that.
Next question is from Darcy. So for a community scale under $30 million project, multi-service civics project like Community Hub, which integrates community programming, economic development, municipal functions, would the Infrastructure Projects Act provide any tangible benefits such as coordinated permitting, provincial permitting, funding eligibility, or technical support? And if so, what would the process for a municipality to initiate or request that level of coordination without a formal provincial designation?
On the first question, I think it would help with coordinated provincial permitting, certainly. If it was designated, funding eligibility, technical support, no, not under this act. There may be other, well, there would certainly be other provincial programs that are aimed at providing support in those areas, but not this legislation. It is really specific to permitting. And the second question, you would need to have, for initiating or requesting that level of coordination, it would need to be designated under this act to access that coordinated provincial permitting. Having said that, we do want to be helpful, and so I think through the conversations that would happen, the discussions with the sponsoring ministry about a project, we could see if it doesn't fit under the designation criteria, what support could be possible.
So the next question is, if a public infrastructure like water or wastewater project costing at least 20 million were to support high density residential, industrial, commercial, and or institutional developments on First Nations land, would it be considered eligible?
Lynn, I'm going to ask you to jump in because I know you've been thinking about this.
Yeah, I think under the eligibility criteria that it needs to be established by regulation, there's a little bit of flexibility in adjusting the capital cost factor weighted with all these other factors that are being identified here. And I think that's kind of where we'd like to hear feedback from local governments about what types of projects that you're needing in your communities, and what kinds of pitfalls or delays that you might envision that this act could assist in. And I think that's kind of these examples are really valuable as we're working towards developing some sort of regulation that's flexible enough to adapt to community needs and where projects are needed in the particular community. So I think this is a really good example for us to take back and consider, but hearing about what other projects local governments are working on will be helpful too, as we work towards developing a regulation for these factors.
Excellent.
Don't see any other questions waiting.
Hey, should we wrap up? Glenn.
Thank you. I just wanted to perhaps ask a question to help, I think, some of the some of the questions that I've heard. And one is, I think, can you kind of speak a little bit more to the timing of when a project is triggered under the Act? To me, a lot of these questions perhaps are presupposing that a project is identified or triggered under the Act before it actually starts. And so like when is a project in its life cycle actually triggered by this Act and potentially could become a provincially significant project? Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Yeah. So it is intended because of the criteria, especially for project readiness, that the project is already viable and funded and underway, and is actually experiencing delays in permitting. And so it is sort of generally overall intended, and we expect them to be underway, which is why it's not really funding. Being designated doesn't really increase your chances of being funded because it's not intended for the conceptual stage. The kind of complication with that is that the expedited environmental assessment tool, which we haven't, really started developing in any kind of detail, that would need to happen before the project is underway. And so that one is much earlier in the project process. However, I think in terms of local governments, most projects don't go through an environmental assessment. And so likely the most common most common trigger would be after a project is underway. Team, anyone want to add anything to that answer?
I think you got it, Jody.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I might reiterate, which I think we've said a couple times, but just to make it super clear for folks that it's not, the Act can only do what the Act can do in terms of the tools and pathways that Jody highlighted. And so if those are not the issues that a project is facing, then there's no sort of like secret extra tool that we can give to it. So it's just really those permitting issues or any other holdups that have been identified through those tools. There's no secret power there. Looks like Jeff has another question. So Claudia, if you could unmute Jeff.
Perfect. And just to respond a bit, like to Lynn's comment or question, I guess, as well about like local governments. Like I think and I'm with the city of Port Moody, so we're like a medium size, like a smaller, maybe medium sized municipality. But the threshold of $100 million is definitely high. I think for us to see that we're kind of being able to be included. I think it would be like in the questions, we're seeing like $20-30 million projects. I think that's more what would be like quite a significant project, like financially for a municipality. So I think that's where we would, I think about even like large sewer infrastructure projects. We're probably like in the $20 million range, and I think that's where we would start to see the benefits. At 100 million, like it's not very often that we have a project like that.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, to your point, we have had feedback from others around the $100 million threshold being an issue, but it's not it's an or situation. Yeah. It's not that it has to be $100 million. There's an or aspect, and I think Brittany's just going to show that on the screen. And I think to the point that I think someone made around, if you had a project that was really close to the $100 million threshold, to get to $100 million, could you include another aspect of it? I think we need to look at those potential projects as how integrated they are to the whole purpose of the project itself. So I think there's an ability for us to be flexible in looking at the situation because there's it's either $100 million or significant public benefits. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is if there's other elements of designated project or that project that are sort of in stages, if they're really integrated with each other and they can't operate one without the other for the public benefit, you know, we could take a look at that too, potentially.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think we'd love to hear from you on that, or that second one, the significant public benefits, about what would work for you, what types of projects you see that could meet this criteria if it fits the significant public benefits. We we really haven't fleshed that out.
Yeah, and one of your slides, sorry, I did notice one of your slides had some more sort of like in the project types. I thought that started to like the criteria 1 project types. I thought that started to give a good, that made me think about like infrastructure, sewage treatment, sewer projects. If we have like critical infrastructure that's failing or needing to be dealt with. So
yeah, and certainly, yeah, in the local government context, the post-disaster recovery it is a big one, and we do have public infrastructure in there as well, food and water supply. So yeah, we're definitely trying to get to that. We just don't know what the kind of formula needs to be.
It would help having just the clarity that it's not just because you kind of read it and $100 million gives me this feeling that it's like, you know, we're like building like large like river crossing bridges and stuff like that, and this is you know, if it is intended to cover these other types of projects, then it would be helpful to have that clarity.
Okay, thank you. That's great.
Thank you.
Feedback. Thank you.
We do have another new question in the Q&A here, Jody. To clarify, if a project is experiencing significant timeline delays during its planning, including designs are underway and it's shovel ready, but has yet to receive funding approval from the province, it does not trigger the act.
So if it's solely provincially funded, then it could be eligible under category 1. If it's a partially funded by the province, then it would be category 2. So I just want to kind of clarify that. And there's not really any triggering of the act per se. It's if a project is experiencing delays, then that ministry in the province can bring that to the attention of us at the Ministry of Infrastructure and see if it would be eligible. So it's not sort of but if the ministry you know, chooses not to do that or doesn't think it would be able to be supported by this legislation, then they might not do that. So I just want to make sure people understand there's no kind of like objective triggering of the act. It's based on the circumstances of the situation. And I would say, I think in terms of receiving a funding approval, it would need to be kind of considered on a project basis, depending on what the project is, and if there's other partners, have they provided funding, that kind of thing. I'm not sure how to kind of answer that in a blanket way. I think they should be kind of approved, and the funding should be approved and underway, ideally. But in some situations, that may not be possible for all of the funding sources. Hopefully that answers it. That's kind of a...
Next question. In cases where a drinking water license requires DFO Fisheries Act authorization, does the environmental permitting process provide expedited support to municipalities for obtaining the FAA? So it's a DFO authorization.
We have not been working with the federal government on this. Federal permitting is not part of this scheme. We haven't talked to them about it. However, knowing that the federal government is very interested in expediting permitting as well with their legislation, that's something we could look into. I don't know that we have an answer to that today, but we could certainly take that away.
Yeah, all I'll say is that I think where it would benefit us and where we know where there's a benefit is the major projects office that's been set up by the federal government. It does designate their own federal projects, and some of them you're seeing some examples that are being applied here in BC. There's a couple that were announced. If you know, there's sort of this magic Venn diagram. If there was a provincial project that was designated as provincially significant and the federal government did the same for a project, then I think you would have, you know, a really you know, a beautiful lineup of expedited permitting for your project. But it would really depend on that. But yes, Jody's right. We'll work with the federal government more as we implement the act to see where we can find those kind of efficiencies.
But just to confirm, our act does not impact
That's
any
right.
federal legislation. Yeah,
That's absolutely right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could see what we could do.
Not seeing any more questions. Jeff did post in the discussion section, the Q&A section, the link again to our engagement site, which has all of the background information on this and also has an open questionnaire on the QP model, which will be our next sort of big topic for consultation, as well as our engagement inbox. So if you have thoughts, ideas, further questions, please feel free to send us a note into that email there, and we're happy to use that as part of the consultation, use it to sort of inform the feedback on our regulations and also answer any questions that might come up.
Yes, please reach out if you have more questions. We do want to make this work as best as possible for you, and so would love to hear from you more. We've had some really great suggestions today that we haven't thought of, so really appreciate you providing those. And guess we've reached the end. So I want to thank the provincial team and UBCM for hosting us and putting this webinar on. There is a question about the timing and posting. It will be posted. We have been recording, and the whole webinar will be posted. We're just trying to figure out how and when. I don't know, Claudia, if you have any timing updates on how that might work. Okay, she said it should be later this week, and we can let you know when that's happened. So thanks to everyone. Yeah, Claudia will send an email to let you know when it's been posted. And we look forward to talking with you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.